Ethan Vale had spent a decade building an empire just to destroy the man who ruined his family. Every calculated decision, every sleepless night, every acquisition was driven by one purpose. And now as he stood at the altar, staring into the wide, innocent eyes of Isabelle Delacroix, he was seconds away from sealing the ultimate act of revenge. He was marrying the daughter of his enemy. The media called it a miracle merger between two feuding empires, a strategic alliance that would bring peace to years of corporate warfare. But Ethan knew better. This wedding was a weapon. Isabelle was nothing more than a pawn in a war she never started. And tonight, after the vows were spoken and the champagne glasses clinked, he would remind her exactly why he married her. Or at least that had been the plan. The wedding reception was elegant, immaculate, cold. Just like him, he played his part flawlessly. The loving groom, the perfect gentleman. Smiles, small talk, gentle touches for the cameras. But inside he waited for the night to fall. He waited for her to see the real him. When they returned to the penthouse, Isabelle slipped off her heels and stood silently by the window, the city lights reflecting in her soft brown eyes. She didn't speak, didn't tremble, didn't ask what came next. Instead, she turned to him and walked forward, placing her hand gently on his chest. "I know," she whispered. Ethan froze. "Know what? That you didn't marry me out of love. That you did it to hurt my father." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence spoke the truth. "Then why did you go through with it?" "Because I wanted you to have all of me, even if it was only for tonight." She leaned in. He could feel her breath, hear the quiver in her voice. "I've never been with anyone, Ethan." Those 7 words hit him harder than any boardroom battle, harder than any loss he had ever suffered. Isabelle Delacroix, the heiress, the daughter of his greatest enemy, a woman raised behind gold-plated walls and diamond rules, and yet untouched, pure. She had just handed him the most fragile, sacred part of herself, willingly, knowing exactly who he was and what he came for. "You knew I would use you, yes. And you still gave me this, yes. Why? Because I've loved you for years, even when you hated my name." He stood there, unable to move. The plan, the revenge, the satisfaction, he thought he would feel it all dissolved. There was only her, bare, vulnerable, and yet stronger than he had ever imagined. Ethan Vale had orchestrated everything with ruthless precision, but nothing had prepared him for this. Not for her quiet courage, not for her love. He had walked into this marriage ready to destroy a family. He never expected that in the process he might destroy himself. And as she stepped closer, lifting her hand to gently trace the edge of his jaw, he realized the truth. This wasn't just a game anymore. It had never been. He had married her for revenge. But tonight she shattered every piece of his plan with a single truth. She loved him, and he had no idea what to do with that. Isabelle Delacroix was born into power but raised in a prison made of glass and gold. From the outside, her life looked perfect. Daughter of a ruthless tycoon, she had the world at her feet. Private tutors, elite schools, designer dresses, and a last name that could open any door. But none of that mattered when you couldn't breathe. Her father, Leonard Delacroix, ran his empire like he ran his family, with iron rules and no space for dreams. Isabelle's life was planned to the hour, her future already written, before she had a chance to choose it. He had handpicked her friends, silenced her opinions, and molded her into the perfect daughter, the flawless heiress. But inside, Isabel longed for something real, something hers. She had learned early on that love in her family was conditional, a transaction disguised as affection. Her mother had left when she was still a child, unable to bear Leonard's control, and since then Isabel had learned to smile, nod, and stay silent. She knew how to be invisible in a room full of powerful men, how to avoid being a threat to her father's empire. Yet in the quiet corners of her world, she nurtured a secret, a feeling she had no right to feel, because the man she fell for at 17, the one she saw once at a charity gala, the one who stood tall with rage in his eyes, was none other than Ethan Vale, the son of Leonard's sworn enemy. Ethan was everything her father hated. The Vale family had once been giants in the real estate world, until Leonard Delacroix crushed them with a well-timed corporate takeover. Ethan's father lost everything, and his mother died of a broken heart. From that day, Ethan disappeared from the public eye, but Isabel never forgot him. She followed his rise from afar, watched as he rebuilt his family's name from the ashes. At 29, Ethan was one of the youngest billionaires in the country. CEO of Vale Holdings, a man feared in boardrooms and worshipped by magazines. The world admired his brilliance, but Isabel saw something more. Beneath his cold, sharp exterior, she sensed pain, a depth she couldn't explain. She didn't know he remembered her too, that he had seen her at that same gala, a quiet girl with sad eyes and a dress 2 sizes too big, standing beside the man he despised. Ethan hadn't spoken to her then. But years later, when the perfect opportunity came to destroy Leonard Delacroix from the inside, Isabel became his answer, a proposal publicized as a merger of dynasties, a whirlwind engagement covered by every media outlet. The marriage was sold to the public as a reconciliation between 2 warring families, a symbol of peace and progress. But behind the press releases and champagne toasts, Ethan was crafting the final phase of his revenge. Marrying Isabel would give him access to Leonard's holdings. He would control Delacroix shares through her, then strip the empire piece by piece until Leonard had nothing left. He expected resistance. He expected a spoiled heiress who would cry, rebel, or beg. Instead, Isabel quietly accepted. No tantrum, no fight. Just a soft yes and an unreadable smile. It confused him, it annoyed him, and then it intrigued him. Isabel never once asked why he chose her. She moved into his penthouse where the ring gave the interviews. She let the world believe in the fairy tale, even though she knew it wasn't real. But what Ethan didn't know was that for her this wasn't a sacrifice. It was the closest she had ever been to the man who once lit something inside her. For Isabel, marrying Ethan wasn't the end. It was a beginning, even if it ended in ruin, even if it destroyed her. Because in her heart, she believed something he did not, that love when real could survive anything, even revenge, even hatred, even a marriage born out of war. The early days of their marriage were a careful dance of distance and performance. Ethan played the part of the cold, controlled husband, keeping his interactions with Isabel limited to what was necessary for the cameras and business events. In front of the world, they were the ideal power couple, beautiful, composed, untouchable. Behind closed doors, they were strangers walking the same halls, sleeping in the same bed, and yet oceans apart. Isabel never complained. She kept her voice soft, her movements graceful, her presence gentle. She made tea for him in the mornings, even though he never asked. She waited for him late at night, even when he didn't come home. She listened in silence when he took calls, never once interrupting or demanding his attention. Her restraint puzzled him. Ethan had expected arrogance, or at least entitlement. Instead, he found a woman who observed more than she spoke, who gave more than she took. One evening he came home to find her curled up on the sofa with a book, her eyes swollen from crying. She quickly wiped her tears and stood to greet him, but something inside him shifted. He didn't ask why she had cried. He simply nodded, walked past her, and retreated to his study. But he didn't forget. The next morning he ordered fresh roses to be delivered to the penthouse. Not for her, he told himself, just for appearance. Still, she smiled when she saw them, and that smile stayed with him all day. Slowly, moments like that began to pile up her hand, brushing his by accident in the kitchen, the sound of her soft laugh, when he muttered sarcasm under his breath, the way she looked at him, like he was something more than just a tool of vengeance. One night after a tense dinner with Leonard, Isabel stayed silent in the car. Ethan was unusually quiet. Too, his jaw clenched his knuckles, white against the steering wheel. "Your father thinks he still owns you," he said suddenly. Isabel looked at him, her voice calm. "I've never been his possession." Ethan turned to her. "Then why let him control you?" She hesitated, because sometimes it's easier than fighting. Her answer wasn't what he expected. For a moment he saw the cage around her, not built with bars, but with expectations, duty, loyalty. He realized then that she too was a prisoner of the past. That night he didn't retreat to the study. He sat beside her on the bed and asked her about the book she was reading. It was the first time he initiated a conversation that wasn't about business. From that night on, something changed. The space between them began to shrink. He started noticing things about her, the way she hummed when she watered the plants on the balcony, how she always folded his ties after he tossed them on the chair, how she always set a second cup of tea beside his, whether he drank it or not. Once she fell asleep on the couch, waiting for him to return from a late meeting. When he saw her there curled up like a child, he covered her with a blanket and stood for several minutes just watching her breathe. Another night, a storm knocked out the power, and they ended up sitting by candlelight, talking for hours about everything but the war between their families. She told him about her childhood, her dreams of being a writer, the stories she used to write and hide in her closet so her father wouldn't find them. He listened, really listened, and for the first time Ethan laughed. Not the hollow chuckle he gave in boardrooms, but a genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep. It startled both of them. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you," she replied. He reached for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. Days turned into weeks, and the barriers between them continued to dissolve. He started waiting for her at dinner. He let her choose the music in the car. He found excuses to touch her hand, brush her hair from her face, kiss her forehead before bed. One night he saw her standing on the balcony in her nightgown, looking out over the city. He walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned into him without hesitation. "This feels real," she whispered. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "It does." But he still didn't say the words. He still couldn't admit what was happening inside him. Because if he did, the walls he had built for so long would collapse, and he wasn't ready. Not yet. Then came the moment that changed everything. They had returned from an event. Isabel, tired but radiant in a black satin dress, looked more like a queen than a pawn. Ethan had barely taken his eyes off her all night. When they got home, she excused herself and went to the bedroom. He followed minutes later. She was sitting at her vanity, removing her earrings, her back, straight, her neck exposed. Ethan stood behind her and met her gaze in the mirror. "You were perfect tonight," he said. She smiled faintly. "I did what was expected." "No, you did more than that. You were—" He stopped. "What?" "Beautiful." She turned to face him. "And you were watching me the whole time." He didn't deny it. He stepped closer, his hand moving to her cheek. "I couldn't help it." Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't speak. He leaned in and kissed her soft and slow, no longer for show or control. This time it was real. She kissed him back. And that night they made love for the first time. Not out of duty, not out of vengeance, but out of something neither of them dared name. Afterward she lay against his chest, their bodies tangled in quiet. Ethan stroked her hair, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. He wanted to ask her 1,000 things, to tell her what was happening inside him, but he said only one thing: "I don't want to hurt you." Isabel looked up at him, her eyes clear. "Then don't." And in that moment, Ethan Vale, the man who had vowed to ruin her world, realized he was the one being undone. Not by power, not by revenge, but by the woman he thought he would never love. Ethan had always believed that love was a distraction, a weakness that led men to ruin. He had seen it destroy his father, cripple his mother, and nearly extinguish everything his family had once stood for. For years he had trained himself to feel nothing, to calculate every move with precision and detachment. But in the quiet mornings when he woke to Isabel's sleeping form curled beside him, and in the stillness of their dinners, when she smiled at him like he was more than his scars, he realized something terrifying. He was in love with her. It crept up slowly at first, like the warmth of sunlight through a window. Then one day he couldn't breathe without thinking about her. He didn't want to admit it, not even to himself, because doing so would unravel everything. The plan, the revenge, the purpose that had guided him for so long. But love didn't care about plans. Love had other intentions. He started canceling meetings to spend more time at home. He asked her questions about her writing, brought her coffee in bed, memorized the little things she loved. He even laughed when she teased him about his stiff wardrobe and dry sense of humor. They were happy in a way that felt fragile and real, like something they weren't supposed to have. And then came the day everything cracked open. Ethan had been at the office reviewing old acquisition files when his assistant handed him a manila envelope. It had no return address, no markings, just his name in black ink. Inside were copies of emails, transaction logs, and recordings. All proof that Leonard Delacroix had orchestrated the collapse of Vale Enterprises years ago. But with one devastating detail Ethan had never known. His father hadn't lost the company due to incompetence or recklessness. He had been set up by someone he trusted, a former partner bribed by Leonard, who had betrayed him in exchange for control of another business. But here was the part that shattered Ethan. Isabel had known about this for months. In the folder were journal entries, copies of handwritten pages she had apparently thrown out, but someone had recovered. In one dated 3 weeks before their wedding, she had written, "If Ethan ever finds out I knew and didn't tell him, he will never forgive me. But if I do tell him, he will never see me as anything but a Delacroix." and I can't bear to lose what little of him I have." Ethan couldn't breathe. He read the entry 3 times, then read it again. She had known. She had kept the truth from him. The woman he loved, the woman who had softened the sharpest parts of him, had chosen silence. When he returned to the penthouse that night, Isabel was waiting at the dinner table. Candles lit his favorite wine already poured. She looked up and smiled. "Something's different," she said. "What happened?" He dropped the folder on the table. Her smile vanished. She opened the folder, her hands trembling. Ethan stood there, his jaw tight, waiting for her to speak. Isabel didn't deny it. She didn't beg. She only nodded once and whispered, "I wanted to protect you." From what? From hating me, from walking away, from remembering why you started all this. He stared at her, rage and heartbreak colliding in his chest. "You should have told me. I wanted to. So many times. But you didn't, because I was afraid. I didn't know if your love for me was stronger than your hatred for my father." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. "I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you what I knew would destroy us. You kept me in the dark, and you were planning to let me go on believing it was all my idea to bring him down. I didn't want you to live with that weight. I thought I was sparing you." Ethan turned away, running a hand through his hair. Every instinct in him screamed to walk away, to leave before he broke. But he couldn't, because even now, even after this, he still loved her. Days passed in a blur. They moved like ghosts through the penthouse, barely speaking, barely touching. Isabel gave him space. Ethan needed it, but he hated every second of it. He missed her laugh, her quiet presence, the way she always knew when he needed a moment of silence or a simple touch. One night, after tossing and turning for hours, he walked into her room and found her sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up, startled. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Me neither." He sat beside her, his body aching with everything he hadn't said. "I keep trying to be angry," he admitted, "but all I feel is this pain in my chest when you're not around." Isabel didn't speak. He looked at her. "I know why you did it. I just don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her voice broke. "I understand. I never meant to lie. I only wanted to protect the one good thing in my life. That's what I hate most," he said, "that you became that good thing. You were supposed to be a part of my revenge, and now I can't imagine my life without you." Her breath caught. "Then don't imagine it. Stay." Ethan reached for her hand, and for the first time in days, she let him hold it. "I want to fix this," she whispered. "I don't know how." "We start over," he said. "No secrets, no silence, just us." She nodded slowly. "I'm still afraid. So am I. But I'd rather be afraid with you than alone without you." They stayed on the floor for hours, just holding each other, 2 broken people, trying to find a way back to something real. The truth had nearly torn them apart, but it had also shown them what they had to lose. And neither of them was ready to let go. Not yet. Not ever. The illusion of peace between them didn't last. Although Ethan and Isabel had agreed to rebuild on honesty and love, the scars of betrayal still lingered. Ethan struggled to silence the voice in his head that whispered doubts in the quiet hours of the night. Isabel tried her best to restore his trust, but every small misstep reignited the coldness in his eyes. They loved each other, but sometimes love alone wasn't enough to silence the weight of the past. Tension returned in small doses, missed calls, distracted conversations, half-hearted smiles. Ethan buried himself in work again, pouring hours into new acquisitions and business travel, trying to escape the tightening grip of emotional vulnerability. Isabel began spending more time away from the penthouse, volunteering at community centers and visiting her estranged mother in upstate New York, seeking clarity and grounding outside of the empire that suffocated her. Despite all this, they still shared a bed, still reached for each other at night, still exchanged soft whispers in the dark. But in the daylight, they were growing apart again. The final blow came on a quiet Sunday morning. Isabel stood in the kitchen holding a small white stick with shaking hands. She had been nauseous for days, unable to eat, her emotions fluctuating wildly. She hadn't told Ethan. She wasn't even sure how he would react. When the test turned positive, her breath caught in her throat. She was pregnant. For a moment, she imagined what it might be like. Ethan holding their child, their home, filled with laughter instead of tension. But that dream crumbled quickly when she remembered how unstable everything still was. That night she tried to tell him, but he arrived home, late, eyes heavy with exhaustion, jaw clenched from whatever battle he had faced at work. She sat beside him on the couch and reached for his hand. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." He looked at her brows furrowed. "What is it?" Before she could speak, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at her. "Can it wait? I've got to handle this." Isabel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Sure." He kissed her forehead, then disappeared into his office. She sat alone for hours, the test still hidden in her drawer upstairs. Days passed, her courage faded, then the unthinkable happened. Isabel's father showed up at the penthouse. Leonard Delacroix, the man who had once vowed never to set foot in his daughter's home, stood in the living room like he owned it. Ethan stared at him, ice in his veins. "What are you doing here?" Leonard smirked. "I came for my daughter." Isabel walked in seconds later and froze. "Dad, you don't belong here. I've had enough of watching you rot in this man's shadow. It's time you came home." "I am home," she replied quietly. Leonard's face twisted in anger. "This was never your home. It's a prison, and he's the warden." Ethan stepped forward. "Get out." Leonard turned to him with a mocking smile. "You may have married her, but you'll never understand what it means to be her family. You're nothing but a product of resentment. You'll destroy her like you destroyed yourself." Isabel stood between them. "That's enough. You don't get to speak for me anymore." Leonard's eyes narrowed. "So this is your decision, to stay with him, even now, even after everything? Yes, then you're no daughter of mine." He turned and walked out without another word. The silence he left behind was deafening. That night, Isabel told Ethan about the pregnancy. He said nothing at first, simply staring at her, his face unreadable. Finally, he whispered, "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I went to the doctor this morning. I'm about 8 weeks. He reached out and placed his hand on her stomach. "And this changes everything, doesn't it?" "Only if we let it," she said. "I want this baby Ethan, but not if we're going to raise it in a war zone. I want peace. I want love. I want something better for our child." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then pulled her into his arms. "I want that too. But how do we move forward? How do we stop the past from ruining our future?" "We let go," Isabel whispered. "We stop holding on to what hurt us. We forgive, even when it's hard. Especially then." For a while, it seemed like they might be okay. Ethan took time away from work. He began attending prenatal appointments with her. They chose names together, painted the nursery. read parenting books late into the night. Isabel glowed with happiness. Ethan laughed more often. For once they felt like a family. But healing was never a straight path. During a family shareholder meeting, one of Ethan's uncles questioned Isabel's presence. "She's still a Delacroix," he said. "Can we trust her?" Ethan defended her immediately. "She's my wife. She's the mother of my child. She's part of this family." But later that night he broke down. "I can't keep fighting everyone, Isabel." "I'm tired." "You're not alone," she told him. "You never were." Then she did something he didn't expect. She called her father. She told him she was pregnant, that Ethan had changed, that she wanted her child to grow up without hatred. Leonard didn't respond, but the next morning he sent her a note. "Do what you must. Be happy." That was the closest thing to acceptance Isabel would ever get. But it was enough. The following week, Ethan held a press conference. He revealed the truth about the original betrayal that had torn their families apart. He cleared Isabel's name. He publicly declared that the war was over. Some called him foolish, others called him brave, but all Isabel could see was the man she had always believed in. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Ethan whispered, "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." "You are," she replied. "You already are." "I married you for revenge," Ethan said quietly. "But now I wake up every day praying I never lose you." Isabel pressed her forehead to his. "Then don't hold on to me, no matter what." "I will," he promised. "I swear." And for the first time in their marriage, they both believed it. The calm they had fought so hard to create was brief like a delicate pause before a storm they didn't see coming. Months passed, and Isabel's pregnancy progressed beautifully. Ethan became more attentive, more gentle, more human. He spoke to her belly each night, telling their unborn child about all the things he hoped to do right this time. Isabel felt closer to him than ever before. She had never imagined that the man who once married her for revenge would be the one to hold her hair back when morning sickness overwhelmed her, or kiss her stomach, like it held the most precious treasure he'd ever known. They built routines that became sacred late-night walks, baby name debates, silly arguments about nursery colors. The world outside felt distant. They were in a bubble, and it felt safe until it wasn't. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Isabel collapsed in the hallway. Ethan was in a meeting but rushed home the second he got the call. At the hospital, they told him she had suffered a placental abruption. There was a chance they could save the baby, but it depended on how fast they could act. Isabel drifted in and out of consciousness as nurses prepped her for emergency surgery. Ethan held her hand the entire time, whispering promises he didn't know how to keep. "Don't leave me," he said again and again. "Please, Isabel, please stay." When she woke up hours later, her first question was about the baby. Ethan couldn't speak. His eyes filled with tears as he shook his head slowly. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Isabel stared at the ceiling silent. Then she turned her face to the side and cried like her world had ended. Ethan didn't leave her side, not for a second, but nothing he said could erase the pain she felt. A week later, they held a small private ceremony for their child. No names, no guests, just the two of them in a garden, standing beneath gray skies, saying goodbye to a life that never began. After that day, Isabel changed. She stopped smiling. She stopped writing. She barely spoke. Ethan tried everything to reach her. He cooked her favorite meals, played the music she loved brought home. Flowers even read poetry aloud, despite hating it. But she remained distant, like she had slipped behind an invisible wall. One night she stood by the window and said without turning around, "I think we should take a break." The words hit Ethan like a slap. "What are you saying? I need time to heal, to breathe, to understand who I am without all this pain." "Isabel, we need each other." "That's what I thought," she said. "But maybe I was wrong." "You promised you'd hold on to me," he said. "I did, and I have. But I'm drowning, Ethan. And I don't want to pull you down with me." He begged her not to go, but the next morning she packed a single suitcase and left. No drama, no tears, just quiet, devastating absence. Weeks passed. Ethan threw himself into work again, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know how else to survive the silence. He slept in their bed still on her side. He kept her books untouched, her slippers by the door. Everyone told him time would fix it, but time only made the ache worse. Then one day he received a letter in her handwriting. She had gone to Europe, staying in a small town in Italy with her mother. In the letter she wrote, "I'm trying to find my way back to myself. I'm not ready to come home yet, but I still love you. That hasn't changed." Ethan flew to Italy the next day. He didn't call ahead. He simply showed up at her door, soaked in rain, eyes desperate. When she opened the door and saw him, she froze. "Ethan." "I know you're hurting," he said. "I know you need space, but I need you to know that I still love you. I loved our child. I love the life we almost had, and I'm not giving up on us." She stood there speechless. He stepped forward and took her hands. "I didn't marry you for love, Isabel, but I stayed because of it. You made me believe in something I thought I'd lost forever." She looked at him, her eyes welling with tears. "I feel like I failed you. You didn't. You saved me, even when I didn't know I needed saving." They stood in silence, the rain still falling behind them. Then she whispered, "I'm scared. Me too. But we can be scared together. Just come home with me." She didn't reply. She just wrapped her arms around him and held on, like she never wanted to let go. They spent the next week in Italy, walking through vineyards, eating simple meals, talking late into the night. For the first time in months, Isabel laughed again. Ethan made it his mission to see her smile every day. He didn't push her to return, he just stayed. On their final night there, he pulled her close and said, "If you want to stay here forever, I'll stay too. You're my home now. I want to go back," she said. "I want to try again." Months later, they stood once more in the nursery they had abandoned, repainting the walls, planting fresh hope where grief once lived. They weren't the same people anymore. They were stronger, softer, more forgiving. They knew pain now, but they also knew love, real love, the kind that survives death and loss and silence. Ethan watched Isabel place her hand on her stomach, hope blooming in her eyes. "The doctor said it's possible," she whispered. "We might have another chance." Ethan knelt in front of her and pressed a kiss to her stomach. "Then let's make the most of it. Let's fight for it. Let's love harder than we ever did before." And she nodded, tears streaming down her face, her heart finally at peace. 1 year later, the sun poured through the windows of their home painting. Golden light across the nursery walls, now filled with soft blues and gentle creams. Isabel sat in the rocking chair by the window, a warm blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and a tiny newborn in her arms. Ethan knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on the baby's back, his eyes shining with a quiet reverence he never thought he was capable of. Their daughter, Ava Grace Vale, had come into the world with a cry so powerful it made Ethan weep. He had held her moments after birth, his chest shaking with emotion, whispering promises of love, safety, and everything he had once thought he would never have. Isabel had been calm throughout the delivery, her strength shining through even as tears streamed down her face. It was the moment that healed what was broken. A new beginning, not to erase the past, but to honor it and grow from it. The months leading up to Ava's birth had been filled with anticipation, careful joy, and cautious hope. They had taken every precaution, followed every doctor's instruction, and leaned on each other in moments of fear and anxiety. Ethan had turned down every major deal that year to stay close to be fully present. He no longer measured success by stock prices or headlines, but by the sound of his wife's laughter and the flutter of their baby's heartbeat. Isabel had written again, her fingers dancing across the keys with purpose, her stories now infused with the depth of someone who had known love loss and rebirth. Her first published book was dedicated simply to the one who married me for revenge, but stayed for love. When the publisher asked about it in an interview, she smiled and said, "Sometimes the wrong reason leads you to the right person." Their families had changed too. Leonard, after the loss of his first grandchild and the birth of his second, had softened in ways no one thought possible. He wasn't perfect, but he visited Ava, often holding her with a gentleness that surprised even himself. Ethan's extended family, once skeptical of Isabel, now adored her. The peace between both sides wasn't immediate, but it was real. Forgiveness, they learned, was not a single act, but a choice repeated every day. On Ava's first night home, Ethan stood in the nursery, holding her close, watching Isabel sleep nearby. He whispered, "You are everything. You are every second chance I didn't think I deserved." He kissed his daughter's head and held her until she drifted off. In the days that followed, their home was filled with warmth, late-night lullabies, soft coos, and the quiet contentment of a love that had survived the impossible. They had walked through betrayal, grief, separation, and silence, but had come out stronger, not despite it all, but because of it. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that made it beautiful. One evening, as they sat beneath the stars on their balcony, Ava asleep in her crib, Isabel rested her head on Ethan's shoulder and asked, "Do you ever think about how it all started?" All the time, he replied, "And I still can't believe I almost lost you because I couldn't see past my pain." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "But you didn't. You chose love. You let it win." Ethan smiled and kissed her forehead. "I didn't just choose it. I surrendered to it." Because the truth is, love doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait until the timing is right. It crashes and breaks down walls and rebuilds everything we thought we knew. And sometimes love begins in the most unexpected place, with a vow made in silence and a heart too stubborn to stop believing. Their story was never about revenge. It was about redemption, about learning that even the deepest wounds could heal when touched by love. And in the end, that was all that mattered.